How would you say the books are different from the show?
Well, the books are full of words that you read, and the show gets me paid my.
So, we started this journey in the mud. Just a tall guy shitting in the woods and a handful of goose eggs. It was cozy, it was modest, and it was, dare I say, optimistic.
You know nothing.
But then the back half happened. The training wheels came off and we were plunged into the peak darkness we've come to expect from this brand. The Hedge Knight simulator evolved into a high-octane Super Bowl of violence, climaxing in an episode so impactful that people are actually comparing it to Breaking Bad's Ozymandias.
You serious?
A 9.7 on IMDb for a show about a guy who can barely afford a decent sandwich? My brother in Christ, what is happening?
No matter how it may look, I only had you in my heart.
The real question, however, is whether the show maintained that restraint we praised in part 1, or if it drifted toward the usual franchise escalation. But A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms did something much braver. I didn't even clock it at first, but when I did, it genuinely caught me off guard, and I'm pretty sure it's going to do the same to you. So today, we're looking at the whole season to see how this series deepened its philosophy instead of just expanding its budget in the final episodes. Let's revisit the quiet finale that might have actually saved the reputation of the Seven Kingdom.
Sir Duncan the Tall. 4 pages for Sir Duncan. He must have been quite a man.
So they say.
One of the most exhausting things about modern franchise filmmaking, and I'm looking at you, late-stage Game of Thrones, is the obsession with the big moment.
We can't beat them in a straight fight.
The writers became so addicted to the Twitter trend shock value that they completely forgot that for a death to matter, it has to have weight. It has to leave a bruise. In the final seasons of Game of Thrones, deaths felt like they were checked off of a grocery list. Oh, the Night King is dead? Cool. Who's next? A dragon? Sure. Let's 3-tap him from a boat because we need to move the plot along. It was hollow, it was spectacle for the sake of spectacle, and it felt about as meaningful as a character death in a Fast and Furious movie, which is to say, not at all, because we know they'll be back for the barbecue in 3 films' time.
We all got a weak spot.
But A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms? It remembers that in Westeros, a single death can break the world. The finale doesn't give us an explosive cliffhanger or a 40-minute dragon battle. Instead, it gives us the morning after. It lingers on the fallout. It forces us to sit in the groggy, awkward silence of a tragedy. And honestly, it's the most return to form this franchise has been since Ned Stark lost his head. Let's talk about Baelor Breakspear. Baelor is essentially the Ned Stark of this story. He's the personification of the good Targaryen, a leader so competent, so honorable, and so genuinely decent that you knew immediately that he was doomed. In a world this cynical, goodness is a terminal illness. But what makes Baelor's death so effective is how it is earned. This wasn't some jump scare death designed to subvert expectations for the sake of a reaction video. It was meticulously set up. If you were paying attention, the show was screaming at you that this was coming. We had the dragon dreams, sure, but the real genius was in the technical details. The show repeatedly pointed out that Baelor was wearing his son's armor because his own hadn't arrived. It was incorrectly sized. It left his skull vulnerable. When Maekar's mace hits him, it's not just a cool action shot, it's the logical payoff of a mistake made in the name of honor. He died defending a lowly hedge knight because he believed the crown should stand for justice. It's heartbreaking because it's deserved, not because it's shocking. And the aftermath? This is how you handle a death. The finale, the morrow, feels like a stage play. It's quiet, it's somber, and it's deeply mature. We see the dismantling of the tournament grounds, and it's one of the best uses of visual storytelling that I've seen in years. Watching the tents come down and the mud being cleared away, it's the end of the illusion. The glory of the tournament is gone, replaced by the cold reality of a corpse in a tent. The show signals that the party is over, and all that's left is the bill. Which brings us to Maekar. If this were a typical junk food fantasy show, he would be our villain. He's the grumpy, brooding father who accidentally killed the only good man in the family. But the show treats him with an incredible amount of moral complexity. Maekar is presented not as a villain, he's a grieving, burdened father. His anger in the finale is abject tragedy. You can see the weight of the Kinslayer label already settling on his shoulders. He knows that from this day forward, every misfortune in the realm will be blamed on him. He views the accident as a punishment from the gods. The scene between him and Egg at the end is legitimately touching, which is a weird thing to say about a Targaryen interaction that doesn't involve arson or incest. Maekar realized he has failed his 3 eldest sons. Aerion is a sociopath, Darren is a drunk, and he's just killed the brother he loved. Egg is his last son, his final chance to mold a Targaryen into something that isn't a complete disaster. It's a moment of desperate, gritty redemption, and it adds more layers to the Targaryen dynasty than a dozen CGI Dracarys moments ever could. Now, I know some people had issues with the pacing. Episode 5, In the Name of the Mother, made a very bold, very risky move by dropping a 20-minute flea bottom flashback right in the middle of the trial of 7. In terms of traditional pacing, it's a total momentum killer. It's like being at the peak game of the season and suddenly the broadcast cuts to a documentary about the quarterback's childhood. It caused some serious tonal whiplash for a lot of viewers. But for me, I loved it. Why? Because it gave the violence context. The combat in the Trial of the Seven wasn't the clean anime-style dancing we see in The Rings of Power or later Game of Thrones. It was brutally real. It was clunky. It was men in pots and pans swinging heavy iron at each other until someone's head caved in. By cutting back to Dunk's childhood in Flea Bottom, the show reminds us why he's fighting. He's not fighting for the realm or the king. He's fighting because he knows what it's like to have nothing. He's a street fighting brawler who survived the gutters of King's Landing, and that's why he survives the trial. He's not a glorious hero. He's a walking corpse who refuses to stay down. The flashback blew up the pace, sure, but it anchored the soul of the character. The political consequences are handled with the same level of restraint too. We don't get exposition-heavy scenes of lords sitting around a table explaining the line of succession. We get the emotional shorthand. We see Valar burying a father who should have been king. We feel the groggy, empty mood of a kingdom that just lost its future. It feels like the morning after a big party where someone died and now everyone is just expected to pick up the pieces and walk on. The show even uses its music to differentiate itself from the epic bombast of its predecessors. Instead of a soaring orchestral swell, we get morose jazz and contemporary songs like 16 Tons in the credits. It's jarring at first, but it's a brilliant choice. It signals to us that this show isn't a high fantasy fairy tale, but a story about systemic poverty, about the small folk who get crushed by the wheels of the great houses. It's mature, it's unconventional, and it's unapologetically its own thing. Comparing this to House of the Dragon is almost unfair. House of the Dragon is a unrequited scale of dragons and prophecy. It's fine, but it lacks heart. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms proves that you can reach that peak darkness and maintain a 9.7 IMDb rating without a single dragon on screen. Why? Because we care about the people. We care about the dynamic duo of Dunk and Egg more than we care about which blonde person sits on the uncomfortable chair. The finale reinforces the show's core lore. Actions carry lasting consequences. You don't get to kill a prince and just walk away. You don't get to be a hero without losing something. It's a somber, languid exploration of identity that prioritizes the morning after over the big night. That level of maturity is genuinely breathtaking. But as Dunk walks away from the tournament grounds, a walking corpse with no job and a dead patron, we have to look at the man himself. Because as the fallout of Ashford settles, the show starts to pull at a thread that was only whispered about in the books. The idea that our hero might be a complete fraud.
I could tell you about Sir Duncan the Tall. Those were always your favourites.
Those weren't my favourites. My favourites were the scary ones.
Titles in Westeros are a bit like blue check marks on Twitter used to be. They're supposed to signify importance, but most of the time they're just bought, inherited, or handed out to people who don't deserve them. We've spent years watching Sir This and Lord That commit atrocities while hiding behind a fancy prefix. The Sir doesn't make the man, but in the later seasons of Game of Thrones, the show seemed to forget that. It became obsessed with the Chosen One status and the royal lineage, as if a character's worth was dictated by which magical womb they crawled pulled out of. But A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms pulls at a thread that turns the entire concept of legitimacy on its head. It asks a question that would make most highborn lords choke on their wine. What if the most true knight in the realm is actually a complete fraud? In the books, George R.R. Martin keeps Dunk's knighthood in a state of Schrodinger's ambiguity. Dunk says Sir Arlen knighted him, but he's also a bit cagey about the details. It's a lingering doubt that haunts the character, but the show doesn't just lean into the doubt, it basically takes a neon sign and points it at the fact that Dunk is a fake. The flashback to Pennytree in the finale, The Morrow, is the smoking gun. We finally get a good look at Sir Arlen of Pennytree, and he's not exactly the white knight of Dunk's memories. He's essentially a crazy hobo with a rusted sword. He's a man broken by a world that has no place for a hedge knight with a code. That scene where Arlen dies, it's gut-wrenching because of one specific addition. Dunk asks him, "Why did you never knight me?" And Arlen's heart stops right then and there. It's a big confirmation for the audience. There was no ceremony. No, in the name of the warrior, I charge you to be brave, just a dead old man and a tall kid with a borrowed suit of armor. I even go further and assume that Arlen himself might have been a fraud, a fake knight who passed on a fake legacy, and I love that. It adds a layer of Westerosi systemic poverty to the whole thing. The penny in Arlen's sword hilt isn't just a quirky detail, it's a symbol. He literally carried his home with him because he had nothing else. He belonged to himself. He was a bridge between the highborn and the small folk, but he was a bridge that was falling apart. Now let's look at the penny in the hilt. It's such a tiny, brilliant piece of production design that tells us 1,000 words of backstory. In Westeros, most knights carry family sigils or gold inlaid pommels. Arlen carries a copper. It's a stake in the world for a man who owned nothing. It signifies that he wasn't a cog in the machine of the great houses, he was his own man. When Dunk touches that penny, he's not just honoring a mentor, it's a process of inheriting a philosophy of self-resilience. He's inheriting the idea that you don't need a castle to have a home, and you don't need a king to have a conscience. Now, usually in a junk food fantasy story, the hero is a fraud reveal is used for a cheap I'm not worthy arc until the hero eventually gets knighted for real at the end. But A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is smarter than that. It argues that Dunk's fraud status is actually what makes him an absolute masterclass of a character. Because Dunk knows he isn't a knight by law. He works 10 times harder to be a knight by his actions. His imposter syndrome is his greatest strength. He is terrified that the gods are punishing him for not knowing his place, which gives every choice he makes an incredible moral weight. Think back to the scene where Raymond Fossaway asks Dunk to knight him so he can fight in the Trial of Seven. In a lesser show, Dunk would have done it, and we'd get a heroic music swell, but Dunk refuses. Why? Because he doesn't want to pass on a fake knighthood from a fake knight. He respects the idea, a concept of knight so much that he won't desecrate it with a lie, even when his own life is on the line. That is more honorable than anything Jaime Lannister did for 3 seasons. Consider the psychological weight of that refusal. Dunk is basically saying, the institution is too sacred for me to lie to it, even if I'm already living a lie. It's a paradoxical, beautiful bit of character work. He's valuing the sanctity of the oath more than his own convenience. Most true knights would have just tapped the shoulder and moved on, but the fraud is the only one who cares about the rules enough to be bothered by them. The show sharpens the thesis that legitimacy is earned through choice, not institution. Dunk remembers his vows better than the princes who were born with them. He protects the weak not because he swore an oath in a set, but because he genuinely cannot stand to see people suffer. His honor is a superpower, but it's a superpower fueled by his own internal guilt. This deconstruction of gallantry also manifests in his fighting style, which the Trial of Seven again, Dunk isn't a fencer, he isn't Sir Loras Tyrell dancing around with a flower, he's a flea-bottom brawler. His style is dirty, clumsy, and desperate. He uses his size, he uses his fists, and at one point, he's basically just brawling in the mud. It's pots and pans warfare. It reminds us of his origins in the gutters of King's Landing. He wins not through knightly finesse, but through street fighting survival. By making Dunk a fraud, the show actually makes him the ultimate underdog in a world of inherited billionaires. The Targaryens are the old money elite, convinced that their blood gives them the right to rule. Dunk is the self-made man, but in the grittiest, most literal sense. He built a character. He's the Westerosi American dream, but instead of a tech startup, he has a rusted shield and a bald kid. The finale doubles down on this when Dunk is offered a place at Storm's End. He's offered upward mobility, he's offered the title and the prestige he's been craving, and what does he do? He rejects it. He chooses the road. he chooses to stay a bridge. By rejecting the easy life, Dunk confirms his identity. He realizes that he doesn't need a king or a ceremony to tell him who he is. He is a knight because of what he does, not because of what people call him. It's a powerful identity over ceremony message that cuts through the usual chosen one garbage we've been fed lately. It's funny, isn't it? We spent 8 years of Game of Thrones arguing about who the rightful heir was. We looked at bloodlines, we looked at marriage certificates, we looked at the prince that was promised prophecies, even though that didn't mean jack shit. And it turns out the most rightful person in the whole Seven Kingdoms is a guy with no last name, no formal title, and a rusted sword. This change from the books, moving from ambiguity to a strong hint of fraud, is a stroke of genius. It makes Dunk a particular case. He's a hero who chose to be a hero without waiting for permission. And in a world where power is usually inherited or stolen, a man who chooses to be good is the most dangerous thing of all. But as much as I love this identity arc, we have to look at the nuts and bolts of how the showrunners built this world. Because while Dunk and Egg are the beating heart, the show added a lot of horizontal texture to make Ashford feel like a real place. And some of those additions, specifically a certain Baratheon, are exactly what the franchise needed to remind us that spectacle is first of all about charisma. Adapting a book is a bit of a minefield. If you stay too close to the text, people call it uninspired. If you change too much, the book purists start sharpening their pitchforks and writing 10,000-word manifestos on Reddit about how you've betrayed the law. Usually, when a showrunner decides to improve on the source material, it results in disaster. We saw that with the later seasons of Game of Thrones, where the writers decided that since they'd run out of George R.R. Martin's books, they'd just wing it. And winging it led to Bran the Broken and I know a killer when I see one. It was the butterfly effect of bad writing. One small change in logic eventually cascades into a season-ending catastrophe that makes you want to delete your HBO Max account. But A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms handles its departures differently. Most of what the show adds isn't vertical escalation. It's not trying to raise the stakes or introduce a new world-ending threat. Instead, it's horizontal expansion. It adds texture and vibrancy. It takes the skeleton of the novella and puts some actual meat on its bones. And for the most part, it works because the additions are rooted in purpose, not just spectacle. Let's start with the undisputed MVP of the added material, Lyonel Baratheon, the Laughing Storm. My guy, what a breath of fresh air. In the books, Lyonel is fine. He's a badass who shows up at the last minute to fight for Dunk because he likes a good brawl. But in the show, he's a badass beacon of light in a sea of prestige misery. While the Targaryens are busy standing in dark tents brooding about their dragon dreams and their royal burdens, Lyonel is out here just absolutely loving life. He's charismatic, he's loud, and he's genuinely fun to be around. The decision to have him befriend Dunk earlier in the season was a masterstroke. It makes his eventual decision to fight as a champion feel earned. It's not just a plot convenience, but it's a reflection of his character. He sees a fellow scrappy brawler in Dunk and decides, yeah, I want to be on that team. He provides a necessary contrast to the dour, self-serious atmosphere of the Ashford tournament. When he laughs, you actually feel like there's joy in this world, which is a rare commodity in Westeros. He's the Baratheon energy we've been missing since Robert died, minus the crippling debt and the wine problem, and the breastplate stretcher. And then there's the small folk texture. The show adds characters like Red and Beanie and minor nobles who aren't just there to move the plot. They're there to make Ashford feel like a real populated place. These additions make the world feel alive. And yes, we have to talk about the toilet humor. Although Bracken's comically loud fart in the middle of a serious scene, it's a polarizing choice. I know, some people found it juvenile, but for me, it was kind of refreshing. And why is that? Because it grounds the world. It's a reminder that these noble knights aren't glowing icons of perfection. They're just guys in metal suits with digestive systems. It's a gallows humor that hits the mud and shit aesthetic. It says, hey, we're all just humans here, and sometimes humans make loud noises at inappropriate times. Just ask my girlfriend. It's a horizontal addition that builds the identity of the show as something separate from the high fantasy pathos of the main series. However, not every addition was a home run. Let's mention the episode 5 flashback once again. I can see why people were frustrated. It holds the momentum of the season's Super Bowl moment, but looking at it from a characterization standpoint, I think I see what they were doing. The flashback introduces Rafe, a gender-swapped and expanded version of a character from the books, and shows us Dunk's street fighting roots. It establishes his sheer will. It explains why he fights the way he does. He's a kid who survived the gutters of Flea Bottom by being too stubborn to stay down. While it's a risky structural choice, it serves the theme of identity over ceremony. It reminds us that underneath the borrowed armor, Dunk is still that kid from the streets. It's vertical characterization disguised as a pacing disaster. Was it too long? Probably. Did it feel like a lore dump? A little bit. But it anchored Dunk's performance in a way that made the final moments of the trial feel more personal. Then we have the prophecy problem, specifically the fortune teller. This was the one addition that felt a little unrequited. The show introduces a fortune teller who drops some bizarre prophecies about Egg's future, specifically hints about Summer Hall. Now, for the book readers, this is a nudge nudge wink wink moment. We know where Egg's story ends, and it's not with a happily ever after. It ends in fire and tragedy. But for the show to be not at all subtle about it, it felt a bit lore baity. It felt like the writers were terrified that if they didn't mention a prophecy, the House of the Dragon crowd would get bored and go back to watching TikToks. It's the franchise itch that HBO just can't really stop scratching. We don't need to be told the exact ending of the show in the first season. Let the mystery be a slow burn. Let us focus on the small story before you start throwing Great House Destiny at us. The same goes for the bribery plot. The show adds a subplot where a steward named Plumber asks Dunk to take a fall in the tournament for money. It's a strange change because logically the trial of the Seven renders the point moot. Dunk's involvement in the trial is a matter of life and death, not sport. But I think I understand the purpose here. It's not just about the money, it's about the corruption of the system. It's there to highlight Dunk's clumsy honesty. He's offered a shortcut to financial security and he rejects it. It reinforces the idea that he's a true knight because he refuses to play the game of prestige misery. It's a small invented moment that strengthens his moral compass, even if it feels a little bit like narrative water. And finally, we have the most significant departure, Dunk's knighthood. As I spoke about in the previous chapter, the show leans heavily into the implication that Dunk was never formally knighted. The books are ambiguous, but the show is very clear. As I mentioned, this was a strength. Why? Because it centers the story on legitimacy versus moral action. It positions Dunk as a true knight because of his behavior, not because of a ceremony. This is the adaptation with purpose at its best. It takes a subtle theme from the book and makes it the beating heart of the show. It turns Dunk into a particular case, a hero who is technically a fraud, but morally a saint. It makes his rejection of Storm's End in the finale more powerful. He's not rejecting a job, he's rejecting a lie. He realizes that he can't be part of the institutional knight world while he's carrying the weight of his own illegitimacy. He chooses the road because the road is the only place where he can be truly honest. But the most controversial addition, the one that really blew up the pace, was the ending. The show departs from the novella in a major way by having Maekar initially refuse to let Egg go. This leads to Egg lying to Dunk and running away. I've seen a lot of tonal whiplash over this choice. Some felt it undermined the character development, making it seem like Maekar hadn't learned anything from his brother's death, but I think it makes more sense for the Targaryen internal struggle. Maekar is a grieving father. He's a grumpy person who is terrified of losing his last son. His pride won't let him just let the boy go with a hedge knight. And Egg's lie? It's a perfect structural symmetry. The season started with Dunk taking on a new identity, and it ends with Egg doing the same. It shows that Egg has learned something from Dunk, not just about honor, but about survival. He's willing to lie to do what he thinks is right. It increases the long-term dramatic tension without needing to inflate the scale. It frames Egg's future kinghood as something that is being forged through hardship, not just handed over by prophecy. Ultimately, the adaptation with purpose is what saved this show from being just another franchise product. By focusing on the small folk, the systemic poverty, and the personal choices, the showrunners managed to differentiate this show from the rest of the brand. They used their budget to expand the world's texture horizontally, rather than trying to compete with the epic scale of dragons. They proved that you don't need massive budgets to tell a compelling story. You just need a Lion of the Storm to give us a laugh, a clumsy knight to give us a heart, and a writer who knows that fidelity to the spirit is more important than fidelity to every single plot point. But as we look at the fallout of Egg's choice, we have to realize that the seeds of madness have been planted. This isn't just a fun hedge knight simulator anymore. It's the beginning of a journey that will change the world. When we talk about the butterfly effect and adaptations, we're usually talking about it with a sense of impending doom. You change one tiny detail in season 1, you cut a certain character, you alter a motivation, you skip a conversation, and by season 4, your entire narrative has collapsed because you didn't have the foundation to support the weight of the story. We saw this with Game of Thrones. They cut characters like Lady Stoneheart or young Griff, thinking they were streamlining the plot, but they were actually just removing the load-bearing walls of the narrative house. By the end, the whole building fell over because the writers were trying to hang a heavy prophecy chandelier on a ceiling made of wet cardboard. Usually when a showrunner decides to deviate significantly from a George R.R. Martin finale, I start preparing for a downfall video, but A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms just pulled off the rarest trick in the book. They made a massive change to the source material that actually makes the story better. I'm talking, of course, about Egg's choice. In the original novella, the ending is, well, it's a bit cozy. Maekar realizes that Dunk is a good influence. He sees that his other sons are various flavors of Targaryen disaster, and he gives his official royal blessing for Egg to travel the realm as Dunk's squire. It's a clean handoff. It's a legal road trip. It's a hedge knight simulator with a permit from the local authorities. But the show looks at that clean ending and says, nah, let's make it messy. Let's make it dangerous. Let's make it human. The biggest divergence, the one that has audiences and book readers alike doing a double take, is that in this version, Maekar says no. He refuses to let his last son go off in the mud with a hedge knight who just caused the death of the crown prince. And because of that refusal, Egg is forced to make a choice. He chooses to lie. He chooses to manipulate the man he respects most. He chooses to become a fugitive. And my brother in Christ, this is a masterclass in vertical characterization. But before we even get to the lie, we have to talk about the knife scene. This was without question the most chilling moment of the entire season. During the fallout of the trial, we see Egg pick up a knife, and for a split second, you see it in his eyes. He is looking at his brother Aerion, the man who just ruined everything, and he's contemplating murder. It's a frightening glimpse into the Targaryen bloodline. For a moment, Egg isn't the cute, bold kid or the annoying younger brother anymore. He's a Targaryen, and in this world, being a Targaryen means you're always one bad day away from setting the world on fire. Some people call it the seeds of madness, and they're absolutely right. It's a brilliant bit of foreshadowing for Egg's eventual tragic end at Summerhall. It tells us that despite his kindness, despite his desire for justice, there is a flickering candle of violence inside him. It adds a layer of danger to a character that, in the books, can sometimes feel a bit too much like a perfect little prince. This moment of internal conflict is what separates content from cinema. A content show would have Egg just be a saintly hero, but A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms wants you to remember that this kid is going to grow up to be a king who potentially dooms his entire family. Seeing that madness start to sprout in a muddy field at Ashford, that is peak Westeros. And then when we have the confrontation with Maekar, I mentioned earlier that Maekar isn't a villain, and the finale really hammers that home. He is an abjectly tragic father. When he looks at Egg and calls him his last son, the only one who hasn't let him down, you feel the desperation. He's not being a tyrant, he's trying to save the last part of his family. He's a broken man who just accidentally killed his brother, and he's terrified of losing the only child he has left who hasn't turned into a drunk or a monster. By having Maekar refuse to let Egg go, the show creates a moral deadlock. Maekar's intentions are good, but they result in his son turning away from him. It's a tragic failure of fatherhood that adds 10 layers of complexity to a character who could have easily been a grumpy antagonist. But the real gold is the lie itself. Egg returns to Dunk and tells him that Maekar gave his blessing. It's a bittersweet moment to maturity, but it's also a loss of innocence. Egg is using the trust Dunk has in him to manipulate the situation. He's choosing the road over the golden cage, but he's doing it through a betrayal. Dunk thinks he's an authorized guardian traveling with a prince under the king's protection, but in reality, he's a kidnapper. He's a fugitive. He is a ticking time bomb walking through the Seven Kingdoms. This completely changes the dynamic for future seasons. In the books, their journey is a series of adventures of the week. It's cozy, it's episodic, but in the show, it's a high-stakes drama about the consequences of a lie. Every time they run into a lord or a group of soldiers, the tension is going to be through the roof. Dunk doesn't know he's a wanted man. He doesn't know that if he's caught, if his head is going to end up on a spike for abducting a member of the royal family. This increases the long-term dramatic tension without needing to inflate the scale. We don't need a White Walker threat or a dragon invasion to make the road dangerous. We just need the morning after realization that our heroes are outlaws. It turns the dynamic duo into fugitives, and that is infinitely more gripping than a legally sanctioned road trip. The moment Dunk finds out the truth truth is going to be devastating for their relationship. Dunk values honor and honesty above all else. His imposter syndrome already makes him feel like he's walking on thin ice. When he finds out that his squire, his only friend, has been using him to hide from the king, it's going to test their friendship in a way the books never even dreamed of. It turns their bond from a partnership into a shared sin. It's also a brilliant bit of horizontal expansion for Egg's future kinghood. If Egg is going to be the king who eventually tries to help the small folk, he needs to understand what it's like to be an outsider. By running away and becoming a fraud, he is truly experiencing the world as a nobody. He isn't just playing at being a commoner with his father's permission, he is living as one because he has no other choice. His empathy for the small folk is being forged through hardship, not just handed over by a tutor. This divergence is the boldest change of the season, and it's the one that gives me the most hope. It shows that the showrunners aren't just copy-pasting the book, they are thinking about the themes. They realize that the theme of identity over ceremony applies to Egg just as much as it does to Dunk. Both of them are rejecting their institutional status to find something more authentic on the road. It destroys the crazy status quo and replaces it with something dynamic and dangerous. It takes a story that was already good and adds a layer of prestige, drama, tension that fits perfectly into the wider world of Westeros. It reminds us that power and status don't define your value, but your choices do. And Egg has chosen to be a lunk rather than a prince. It's funny, isn't it? HBO spent years trying to give us epic endings that felt unearned and hollow. But here, they gave us a small ending that feels massive. A lie told, a stolen horse, and two frauds walking into the sunset. That is peak television, which doesn't need a teaser to get you excited for season 2. It just needs the realization that these two people are in way over their heads. This finale saved Westeros from its own obsession with scale. It proved that restraint is a superpower. By moving from survival to identity, the show found its soul. It showed us that the Game of Thrones isn't just played in palaces, it's played in the hearts of a tall guy with a rusted shield and a bold kid who's a better liar than he looks. So, 6 episodes later, and the world hasn't ended. No dragons burned down a city, no White Walkers shattered the wall, and miraculously, nobody unlocked a fast travel point to teleport across the continent in a single montage. We started in the mud with a sick old man, and we ended up in the mud with a grieving kingdom. And I think I finally stopped needing my Westerosi therapist. The finale, The Morrow, is perhaps the most un-HBO thing I've seen in years. Usually a season finale in this franchise is designed to be a nuclear event. You expect the Red Wedding, the explosion of the set of Baelor, or at the very least a 10-minute sequence of ships sailing toward a sequel, but A Night of the Seven Kingdoms chose a different path. It chose the Anti-Climax. It is a languid, pedestrian, and deeply heartfelt hour of television. Some might call it boring because it doesn't move the plot, and technically they're right. By the end of the episode, Dunk and Egg are mostly in the same position they were at the start of the season once they met. They're on the road, but internally, everything has shifted. This season was never about the fate of the realm. It was about the interrogation of identity. We watched Dunk spend 5 episodes wrestling with the ghost of Sir Arlen and the guilt of being a flea-bottom fraud. He was trying to be Sir Duncan the Tall, a glowing icon of chivalry, while feeling like just Dunk, a street-fighting brawler. In the finale, he finally merges the two. He realizes that being a knight isn't about the ceremony he never had, but it's about the bruises that he earned. He integrates his scrappy pots and pans survival instincts with his noble heart. He finds his soul in the fallout of a tragedy. That is a more satisfying arc than any Prince that was promised prophecy could ever provide. Looking back at the season as a whole, it's clear that A Night of the Seven Kingdoms has succeeded where the rest of the franchise failed because it embraced the philosophy of the small story. We've become so accustomed to prestige bloat. We expect 60-minute episodes filled with moving chess pieces and lore-heavy exposition. We expect the show to keep nudging us and reminding us how it connects to the bigger picture. But Night of the Seven Kingdoms stayed small. It stuck to a 30 to 45 minute format that ensured every scene was valuable. There was no fluff, no filler, no parking lot episodes where people just sat around a haunted castle hall tripping on visions of their dead mothers. It proved that the beating heart of this franchise isn't the dragons or the massive CGI budgets, it's the chemistry. The bond between Peter Claffey's Dunk and Dexter Sol Ansel's Egg is the best thing to happen to Westeros since Robert Baratheon Baratheon and Ned Stark had a chat in a crypt. It's infectious, it's sincere, and it's deeply human. House of the Dragon has a bigger budget and higher stakes, but it doesn't have a duo you actually want to hang out with. It doesn't have the refreshing humor or the cozy high note that this show provides. Let's be real, after the junk food cinema of the late Game of Thrones seasons, our standards for blockbuster entertainment were in the gutter. We were used to plot armor, teleportation, and prophecy slop, but this show is a rehabilitation of the brand. It proves that you can reach peak darkness. The 9.7 IMDb rating for the Brutal Episode 5 proves that, without sacrificing logic or character. It proves that audiences actually do have an attention span for well-written dialogue, provided the characters aren't just exposition machines. From an industrial standpoint, this is a massive win for HBO. They've realized that they don't need to spend $200 million on every single project to keep people engaged. They can tell horizontal stories that expand the texture of the world rather than its global stakes. It's a tragedy that allows them to move toward an annual cycle of Westerosi content without it feeling like franchise fatigue. As long as they keep the restraint and the fidelity to the spirit of the source material, I'm actually optimistic. And I never thought I'd say that again about a George R.R. Martin adaptation. The use of modern music in the credits, like that morose jazz, was the final statement of intent. It signaled that the show is mature enough to differentiate itself. It's not trying to be a high fantasy fairy tale. It's a stage play that just happens to take place in a field in Ashford. So, what's the final verdict? A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is a masterpiece of restraint. It moved from survival to identity. It didn't cave to the franchise escalation monster. It didn't give us a cinematic universe teaser for a movie about Aegon's conquest. It just gave us a tall guy, a bald kid, and a long road ahead. It saved Westeros by reminding us why we fell in love with it in the first place. Not because of the kings, but because of the lunks who are brave enough to tell them they're wrong. It's a heartfelt, hopeful, and cozy rehabilitation of a broken brand. But as the road stretches out into season 2, the question remains: how will Dunk react when he finds out Egg lied to him? How far will Maekar go to find his last son? And will the seeds of madness start to bloom before they reach the next tournament? The butterfly effect of Egg's choice is now in motion. The small story has become a dangerous drama, and for the first time in 5 years, I can honestly say this about a Game of Thrones project. I cannot wait to see what's around the next bend in the road. But for now, the Hedge Knight simulator is pausing, the party is over, the tents are down, and all we have left is the walk, and it's a damn good walk. But as always, that is just my 2 cents. I want to know what you guys thought of the finale. Did the egg lie work for you, or are you a book purist who's already drafting a strongly worded letter to George R.R. Martin? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and remember, if you ever feel like your life is a prestige misery drama, just remember Dunk. He didn't have a title, he didn't have a horse, and he had the shits, but he still managed to be the best knight in the kingdom. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.